The rejection letter felt like a lead weight in Musa's hand, each word a stone pulling him down. He walked through the vibrant chaos of Mayfair, a river of people flowing around him, but he felt utterly alone. The scent of spices and roasting corn, the blast of a taxi hooter, the melodic calls of the street vendors. It was the soundtrack of his life in Johannesburg, but today it all felt like noise from a world he didn't belong to. At 24, he was a ghost, haunting streets that refused to be his home. He pushed open the door to his Gogo's flat, and the familiar, comforting aroma of brewing coffee and freshly baked injera wrapped around him. It was the scent of Ethiopia, a place he knew only through stories. His grandmother sat in her worn armchair by the window, her fingers moving rhythmically over her prayer beads, her gaze calm and deeply knowing. She was his anchor in this swirling sea of a city. "Another door closed, my child?" Gogo's voice was as soft as worn velvet. Musa collapsed onto a nearby stool, letting the letter flutter to the floor. "I don't belong here, Gogo," he confessed, the words tasting like ash. "I try so hard. I have the papers, the qualifications. But my heart, it's empty. I am a stranger in this land, and I'm so tired of trying to pretend I'm not." Gogo set her prayer beads aside, her eyes locking onto his. "You are searching for a job, Musa, but what your soul is crying for is a home. Not just walls and a roof, but a place inside you that feels settled. You think Johannesburg is the whole of South Africa? You have only seen one small, noisy corner of a very large house." She rose and walked to a large, faded map of South Africa pinned to the wall, its surface covered in her spidery handwriting. "This country has 9 rooms," she said, her finger tracing the provincial borders. "Each with its own spirit, its own people, its own story. You have the blood of Ethiopia in your veins, yes, but your feet are planted on this African soil. Perhaps you need to walk it to truly feel it." Musa looked from his grandmother's determined face to the sprawling map. Her words were not a comfort, but a challenge, a small, bright spark in the suffocating darkness of his despair. A wild, improbable idea began to take root in his mind. "You want me to travel?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "I want you to find yourself," she corrected gently. "Go. See the dragon-backed mountains in the east, the 2 oceans meeting at the southern tip, the deep green forests of the north. Talk to the people, listen to their stories. Find the peace of this land that sings your spirit's song. When you find it, you will find your belonging." A current of energy, sharp and clean, shot through Musa. The idea was madness. It was perfect. It was a pilgrimage, not to a holy city of stone and scripture, but to the living heart of a country he had never truly known. A slow smile, the first real one in months, spread across his face. "All 9 of them?" Gogo's own smile was deep and knowing. "All 9. Your journey begins now." She took his hand and pressed a small, worn leather pouch into his palm. It was heavy with more than just coins. "A little to help you on your way. Go with Allah's blessing, my grandson. Go and find your story." The next day, Musa stood in the controlled chaos of Park Station. The roar of engines, the calls of vendors, the babble of a dozen languages. It was the same noise from yesterday, but today it sounded like a symphony of possibility. He was no longer a ghost. He was a traveler with a backpack, a purpose, and a ticket to buy. "1 ticket, please," Musa said, his voice clear and strong, cutting through the station's din. The woman behind the glass looked up, her expression neutral. Musa met her gaze. "To Mpumalanga." The word felt solid, real. The first step. The journey had begun. The bus pulled out of Park Station, leaving the concrete jungle of Johannesburg behind. For hours the landscape was a monotonous blur of high-veld grasslands, vast and flat under a pale, endless sky. Musa watched the city's sharp edges soften into rolling hills dotted with acacia trees. He felt a knot in his stomach begin to loosen with every kilometer that passed. The city of gold, with its promises and its rejections, was finally shrinking in the rearview mirror. As they climbed higher, the air grew cooler, cleaner. The flat plains gave way to dramatic inclines, the earth turning a rich, red color. Forests of pine and eucalyptus, planted in neat, disciplined rows, marched up the hillsides. Then the bus rounded a sharp bend, and the world opened up. Before him lay a panorama of green mountains, their peaks shrouded in a soft, white mist. It was a different world, a different language of landscape. He was an immigrant all over again, but this time there was no fear, only a quiet, breathless wonder. The bus hissed to a stop in Grasskop, a small town perched on the edge of the escarpment. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. Brightly colored buildings lined the main street, and the pace of life was a gentle stroll compared to Johannesburg's frantic sprint. Musa shouldered his backpack and found a small guest house with a creaking wooden sign, run by a friendly woman who clucked over him like a mother hen. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like an outsider being measured and judged. The next day, he joined the throng of tourists at God's window. The view was breathtaking, a sheer drop into a valley so vast and green it seemed to swallow the sky. But the experience was hollow. He was surrounded by the chatter of a dozen languages, the relentless clicking of cameras, and the jostling of people trying to capture the perfect selfie. He stood at the railing, looking out at the magnificent vista, but all he felt was the press of the crowd at his back. He was a spectator, consuming a view, not connecting with a place. Disheartened, Musa wandered down a less traveled path. He found a quiet spot on a warm, flat rock, away from the noise. He tried to capture the sweep of the mountains in his sketchbook, but the lines felt empty. You look, but you do not see. The voice was warm, with a gentle rasp. Musa looked up to see an old woman with eyes as bright and dark as river pebbles. She sat on a colorful blanket a few feet away, her hands busy weaving intricate patterns into a basket. She introduced herself as Sani. Musa closed his sketchbook. "I see the mountains," he said, a defensive edge to his voice. Sani smiled. "Anyone can see the mountains, child. But do you know their story? Long ago," she began, her voice dropping to a whisper, "the sky and the earth were lovers. But they quarreled, and the sky pulled away, leaving this great canyon between them, like a wound in a broken heart. The people were sad, for the land was barren without the sky's touch. So they prayed, not to the mountains, but to the small things the sky had left behind, the dewdrops on the leaves, the mist in the valley. They showed these small, faithful things their love, and in return the small things healed the land. The Great Canyon remained, not as a wound, but as a reminder that even the deepest separation can become a place of beauty." She beckoned him closer. "The mountain is the scar," she said softly. "But the healing, the belonging, is here." She pointed not to the grand vista, but to a small, unassuming plant, with tiny yellow flowers growing in a crack in the rock beside him. "This is Inchlision Kulu, the Great Heart. It holds the memory of that first healing. It has a small story, but it is the land's most powerful one." Musa stared at the plant. He had been sitting next to it for an hour and hadn't noticed it. It was no longer just a weed. It was a character in a story, a symbol of resilience. It belonged. He spent the rest of the afternoon with Sani, not talking much, but simply watching her weave, feeling the warmth of the sun on his skin and listening, not to the wind roaring through the canyon, but to the hum of the bees on the tiny yellow flowers. As the sun began to set, Sani packed her things. "The best view is not always the most crowded," she said with a wink, pointing him towards a barely visible path. "Go. Listen for the heartbeat." Musa followed the path to a secluded rocky outcrop. There were no railings, no signs, no other people, Just him, the vast, silent canyon, and a sky ablaze with orange and purple. The beauty was overwhelming, but this time it didn't feel distant. It felt like a secret being shared just with him. A profound sense of clarity washed over Musa. Gogo had sent him to see the country, but Sani had taught him how to see it. He looked at Sani, this stranger who had given him a priceless gift. "Thank you," he said. He opened his sketchbook to a fresh page and began to draw the small plant, trying to capture its quiet, powerful story. His journey had a new map now, one made of whispers, not highways.